Moving over to the grain markets now, and the November WASDE report is hot off the press, and I was joined earlier this week by Heartland Farm Partners President Jeff Peterson to break it all down. So the WASDE report was released yesterday. Were there any surprises in there for you? Any curveballs for producers?
You know, there really kind of was really a couple major ones as you dig into it. Some of the first of all, the surprise, ones that weren't really too much of a surprise on the corn yield. I'll start off there. Corn yield came in at a 177, which if that holds, that will end up being a new record. But we'll have to see. We'll have to see whether that does hold in. As we dig into the soybean side, that's actually where the surprises did come in. And it isn't a surprise that obviously we had expected. Over on the soybean yield, ended up coming in at a 51.2 yield. Now that compared to a 51.5 that we had in the October report, but the trade was looking for a 51.9 yield. And that 51.9, it really kind of felt like we were headed that way, but as we dug deeper into the numbers, here's what we kind of found. Compared to the October crop report, the WASDE, pod counts came up, and that kind of happens. Usually it seems like as they get through and assess more plots. We kind of thought along with that though we'd see the pod weights go up also, but they didn't. And as a result of the pod weights coming down, that's where we ended up getting a lower yield. And as a result of that, that did lower soybean production 23 million bushels, and the trade wasn't looking for that. And what that actually sets up also, everybody was kind of looking for us to go higher in this report on yield. Now we won't have any yield adjustments or acre adjustments in the December report, so the next time we'll get any information's out there in January, but everybody was probably kind of thinking in January we'd see a higher number. It kind of reverses that trend. As we've done a little bit of looking, it looks like there's over an 80% chance if we see the pod weight come down from the October to the November report, we actually could see it come down again as we come from the November to the January report. So that actually means down the road we could actually see some maybe lower soybean yield yet, which is exact opposite what the trade is looking. Mm-hmm. Now what that did do is that did translate into a change in ending stocks. So when you take total supply minus our total demand and get our ending stocks, everybody was looking for a little bit higher number there, but actually 320 million bushels is where we were last month. Trade was looking for 360 million bushels on the ending stocks, but it ended up coming in at 340 million bushels. Now that's not a big change. And what we do need to see going forward is we do need to see some increased demand from China, but at least it didn't end up growing like what the trade thought.
On the corn side of things, it looks like we saw some record-breaking yields, as you were mentioning earlier, and we're kind of seeing an increase in for ethanol use. How is that going to translate for corn producers?
Yeah, that's a great question. And as we dig into the numbers on the corn side, they did raise the ethanol demand about 50 million bushels in this report. And what we think, though, is as we study where the actual weekly production numbers come out from EIA, what we're noticing, though, is that we notice that down the road, if we stay on this pace, we think there should be some further increases on the ethanol demand side down the road, which will tighten up the ending stocks as we go further down the road. But you asked a great question, what does this mean for the farmer? What we're seeing is because we have a lot of ethanol plants in Nebraska, the stronger demand number that we're seeing out of the ethanol side is meaning some very good basis levels. And the other thing that it did do is it did bring, because we ended up if we think about the ending stock number, we talked about it a lot on soybeans, but that ending stock number came in at 1.493 billion bushels. And last month we were at 1.5. The trade was looking for about a 1.482, so we're a little bit higher, but we did tighten up that ending stock number. And as a result, since we had a pullback in price coming in the report, we're really getting a pretty good little bounce going higher here on the corn side. So I think that also means down the road, it opens up the door to some even higher future prices down the road also.
And speaking of future prices, it looks like soybeans really hit the gas on future prices as well. Can you kind of break down some of the price movements there?
Yeah, exactly. So there's a few interesting things I'd like to look at on what happened on beans, and especially if you're watching during the trade. At one point we had soybeans up over 50 cents a bushel. Now there's a few things that had happened there. We had a big pullback on beans coming into the report. So ultimately the market got a little bit too oversold. But we also talk about computer trade or algorithm trades. And I think what happened is that when that information came out, as USDA was releasing and as they saw the yields come out, what ends up happening is that the computer trade is looking in the news for certain piece of information. And once they saw a smaller yield, and they also looked at the ending stock where it's at, that caused a lot of buying to step in. More buying than what there was for selling, so that's why we saw that surge. The other thing that we're watching closely, though, is just the strong demand that we are seeing. And I know there's a lot of talk out there that China isn't buying enough, but China is buying some. We'd like to see them buy more. We did end up seeing that reduction on exports of 40 million bushels did show up, so as a result in the WASDE report. But we are seeing some very good crush demand locally, and what that's meaning on the bean side is some really good basis levels there locally. And as we go down the road, as we start talking, we haven't talked a lot about it yet, but as we get further down the road, maybe not necessarily in this crop year, but in the next crop year, we're going to have more talk about the renewable diesel and what that means to the crush industry. So down the road, I think we could see some higher crush demand on the soybean side.